yeah, there will be a disclaimer signing towards the end of the course, but as I said, as I guided those people who wish not to be recorded, you are welcome to do so if you sit on those last 2 to 3 rows where you're sitting here or here. That's all good. But I think we've covered this about twice before, so I presume that anyone sitting other ends, you're okay to be signed in terms of your rights, I guess. Now, as I did with my previous lecture at 2:30, I intend not to use my entire 75-minute allowed slot today. It is, after all, spring. 23 days, 23 degrees, beautiful weather, the flowers are blooming, etc. So you deserve slightly more time off. So I'm expecting to end the lecture by hopefully 5 o'clock or so that you get at least 15 minutes off. But that means you gotta take slightly more focus, okay? I mean, you know, you guys pay a lot of tuition fee for this, so yeah. You know, we gotta get through the material, but I'm not one of those people where I try to finish 75-minute dead on the clock every day or anything. You know, on a day like this, on a day like this, I guess, you know, it's time for you to enjoy a little more. You know, those campus couples can go take selfies together. Those of you who are summing, that means basically you're not going out, but you're trying to go out with each other, can also try and meet up for something. Can we have slight more quiet if possible, please? Okay. Now, today's material isn't overly difficult. It's very simple stuff. So that's another reason why I'm trying to give you a slight time off, because I don't think I'd need entire 2 weeks worth of lecture to get through this week's material. So as I said, 5 o'clock dead on is what I'm aiming for. So 50 to 55 minutes, 50 minutes now. So basically focus for a slightly shorter lecture, okay? Can we all do that? If anyone really objects to me finishing lecture slightly earlier, I can give you a slight more Q&A at the end so that you don't feel left out. Okay, so today's focus is basically an application of what you have done for the past few weeks. Once we know about consumers' preferences, once we know about consumers' budget constraints, etc., 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 what you can do is apply them in various different contexts. And that's where finance actually turns out to be a very useful tool in that respect. Okay? So what we're going to do today is engage in something called intertemporal choice. How much does a consumer wish to consume in one period against the other? The thing is, what we'll find out towards the lecture next Wednesday, today, Wednesday, Friday, and then Friday, is that essentially what we are learning today as financiers, in other words, finance students, stem really from this. Consumers' desire to engage in intertemporal choice is what we do for living, what we, at least, I mean, you're not working yet, so what you aim to do for living at the end of the day, okay? So suppose there's a consumer who chooses how much to consume, okay? So his amount of consumption in each period is C1 and C2. There are 2 periods. Think of it as young and old, or working, not working, okay? And then suppose the amount of money the consumer has in each period is M1 and M2. Now, before I engage in the dynamics of all this, what I'm trying to do here is essentially, I'm trying to have some sort of preferences for consuming today, next year, year after, year after, year after. Now, I've been reviewing my sort of lecture recordings a little bit, and I haven't got people at this end of the lecture engaging. So today, all my questions will be directed towards both ends of the lecture. So be prepared, basically. Okay? So without further ado, 1.3 billion won after tax. 13억 정도 보통, 그죠? So first of all your friends will now be potential borrowers. Second, except that you lead a really high life. I don't know about your lifestyle, but suppose you do. I'm going to assume you do. So today, you've got 1.3 billion to spend. You go out to, I don't know, most fine dining places and dine there everywhere, etc. But you engage in a really, really poor deal. You go to, say, Gangwon-land, and then suddenly that's a casino place here in Korea, by the way. And then blow away your entire everything. So you're going to be living in Seoul Station as homeless for the next 5 to 10 years, which actually is not that detached from reality for lottery winners. Apparently, people's happiness after winning lottery is a lot worse, because those people you thought you could trust before, you see the ugly side of them, and then you're not comfortable with this new lifestyle, you tend to squander away your wealth much faster. That's option one. But when you win a lottery in the US and in Europe, there is another option. You can take it as a pension, if you like. So you can get paid, say, I would say, about in installments of, say, 100 million Korean won for the next 20 years. 1억을 20년씩 쭉 받는다. What would be your preference? Option 1, option B? Choice 2 would probably be better for us, right? I mean, that means you can go on a holiday with your girlfriend or girlfriends even, to, I don't know, somewhere like Maldives or Seychelles or somewhere every year, and you can stabilize your consumption throughout, right? Can you see where I'm trying to get at? People have a tendency to sort of engage in a smoothing of consumption over periods. I don't want to be living in a squalid corner of Seoul Station 1 year, then be given a choice to live in the penthouse of Galleria Foray, which cost about 4 billion won to buy, and then drink like the finest wines and live like that the year after. If I could do what I do there for every year, obviously I would do that, but that's unrealistic, yeah? But I'd rather be the sort of a stable guy where my consumption is sort of evens out year after year. I can go to one of those fine dining places from time to time. I can get my child, for now at least, some pre-K nice stuff, 문화센터 돌리고요, and then stuff like that. And then I can occasionally go on trips to, say, I don't know, Guam or Okinawa or somewhere like that with my family, and then spend there a few nights. And that's what we do as people. We prefer stability over extreme uncertainty. I mean, there are exceptions, obviously, but a vast majority of the people. And that is where finance comes in. That's why we need to learn this, because every one of you will be working, hopefully, in a few years' time. But you're not going to work to 70, 80, 90, 95. My 93-year-old granddad doesn't work. But he's got to be consuming something somewhere. You know, he's got to have, he's got to eat, he's got to wear something, he's got somewhere to live. So, given the fluctuations in your income, you want to smooth it out. That's what we are learning today, basically, in temporal markets. And that's where finance comes in. Okay? Without the need for that, there will be no exchange of money. Think about it. I mean, if 전선 학생, or 유범진 학생, or 한주선 학생, or 한대건 학생, whatever, consumes exactly the amount they earn, there will be no need for finance. It's like a primeval society. It's like a hunter-gatherer society of those Neolithic civilizations where you eat what you gather that day. You know, those few raspberries, those few, you hunt and then you eat a deer one day, and then you starve for a few days because you can't hunt anything else on the bad weather. That's how we as early humans were like. That's what we were like. Well, we've moved past that. We are no longer the people that were in the caves holding fire. There are great inventions, and finance has contributed towards that. And you, all of you, will be contributing towards that, the furtherance of that human progress. This is suddenly becoming like a really TED talk, like sort of a lecture. But that's what you will be doing. And that's where the finance comes in. So this is how I motivate this lecture. Okay? So suppose initially that the consumer can transfer money from period 1 to period 2 through saving it without earning interest. Money under the mattress sort of thing. Okay? So like a hunter-gatherer society Mark II. So if 한주선 학생 and 안창규 학생, etc., were living in, say, somewhere like Alaska in about 15,000 years ago, what they would have been doing is, what would you have been doing? Say, eating every day salmons and seals and stuff. You hunt, then you smoke it, then you have the leftover meat stuck in the cave, hanging in the cave, without earning any interest. I mean, the salmon doesn't suddenly become 2 salmons. Unfortunately, 안창규 학생 is not Jesus Christ. So that's that. So, and then there's no possibility of borrowing either. Then there will be 2 kinds of choices. You either consume everything. You have that salmon, great fresh salmons, you have it grilled, and then eat everything. Or you might think, hang on, the weather doesn't look that great. Yeah, like one of the elders will come in and say, there's a west wind blowing or something like that. And then you might not be hunting for a few days. The salmons might not be coming back. So you might think, I've caught about 5 or 6 today. So I'm going to hang it, salt it, dry it, smoke it, and then leave it on the front end of my tent for a few days. That's the option 2. Essentially, it's this. You can consume, that's your budget set. The salmon you caught today plus the salmon you catch tomorrow will be your something called the endowment point. That's where you begin. And then possibility 1 is this. You eat everything today, and then you hunt and you eat everything tomorrow. That's what we as human beings were like. Or possibility 2. You think you might not be able to hunt that much tomorrow, so you leave something out. So what's that slope going to be? Assuming it doesn't rot away. Slope is just -1. There's no interest or anything. Yeah? You save up your grain, you save up your salmon, and then you just eat it tomorrow. There's no interest. It doesn't rot away, hopefully. And then it's just what you have. But let's allow slightly more realistic scenario where you can borrow or lend as some interest rates are. Okay? So 안창규 학생 unfortunately hasn't caught that much salmon. I gotta have salmon for dinner, I think. I think I've said the word salmon about 10 times now. So like it's like those, there is no elephant in the room. I mean, like salmon's basically stuck at the back of my head. So 안창규 학생 hasn't caught that much salmon. But suppose I come in. I'm the sort of a primeval merchant, just like wandering around from city from here to there and everywhere, and I suppose I've got about a truckload of smoked salmon. Yeah? I'm willing to lend to him. I'm going to come back to his town next week, however, and collect. So I lend him 5 salmons. I collect 6 back the day after. Sorry, I mean the week after. What's the weekly interest rate? 20%, right? So that's how primeval societies worked. I mean, apparently the evidence from historians is that interest rates were extortionate. Now, we know all about, for those of you who took Korean history in high school, actually, was it mandatory in your days? Or 국사가 필수였는데 몇 회 아니었던 애가 있어가지고 필수였죠 거의. 그죠? 환곡, 조선시대 환곡. That's a great example of that. You borrow money from the, how am I going to translate, the regional office, 현감, the regional provincial manager, the governor. That sounds like such a great name, but basically 사또의 이방. Yep. And then you get it back after you harvest the stuff in autumn. But then that led to a huge corruption, as we all know. You know, like giving bad quality rice ridden with sand and barley and everything. But what you had to pay back to the public office was top quality rice in full. And then the system became suddenly too bad to the extent that towards the end of Joseon Dynasty in the 19th century, you would just not take any rice from the 관공서 because the regional office, because it was simply too bad. You just pay the rice back in tax, essentially. You borrow nothing and then pay back. So like, that's what interest rate of infinity. Yeah, basically. But can you see how consumer second period income is now given by what you catch? And then how much you borrowed, you have to give it back to me, salmon, plus interest. So you give back 6 salmons. And then you can suppose you catch about 10, then you got to give me back 6 and then consume the remaining 4. So C1 is M1, what you catch, plus what you borrow. Yeah? So this is how much you borrow, essentially, in terms of minus. But your second period consumption is what you get, plus you got to pay back what you borrowed. Yeah? So if you divide both sides by 1 minus r here and here, we get this. So send this to here, then we get something like this. Now this is a point where the finance student is at an advantage in relation to normal economists. We all look at this sort of equation time and again. What's this called? This is a budget constraint, but in what form? What do we say? What do we say about this budget constraint? 1학년 재무관리 시간 중간으로 돌아가 봅시다. 뭐죠? 현재 가치. Or in English, present value. Yeah? The present value of your consumption today is that. The consumption in the second period, tomorrow, has to be discounted by the current interest rate. Why? Yeah, exactly. If this 1 salmon today and 1 salmon tomorrow doesn't have equal value. Because if I save up 1 salmon and give it to 안창규 학생, he's going to give me back 1.2 salmon and then just give me the head for me to cook and grill. Yeah? So just by lending him the remainder of the salmon, the 0.8 portion of the salmon, I can get back an entire salmon tomorrow. So tomorrow's salmon, to me, is worth less than today's salmon. We've all seen this, yeah? But that's going to equal what? What's this on the right-hand side? Income and consumption. The present value of income has to be equal to the present value of consumption. Otherwise, you're in deep trouble. People will come and put in red stickers to your house everywhere. Yeah? Whatever you borrow must eventually be repaid back. Whatever you save, you will eventually consume. Now here you might think, hang on, but people die leaving savings. What happens there? I'm not going to tell you that much on this, but there's a great model called the overlapping generations model, where the money you leave for your child also generates utility for you. That it's like an infinite sequence of me, my dad, to me, to my daughter, to my daughter's daughter, to my daughter's daughter's son, to etc. Then that would make sense, yeah? So in that case, your whole generation, your whole houses, all men must die, but your house's name lives on. The present value of that consumption by your house must equal the present value of income generated by your house down the generations. So another Game of Thrones reference here. If you're heavily in debt to the Iron Bank, you got to win back the Seven Kingdoms, and you got to repay the bank at some point, basically. Yeah. Now, the budget constraint, therefore, look like this. The slope is what? Slightly steeper than before. If you note, if you superimpose the graph in the previous slide to that, I've deliberately designed so that the slope will be greater than 45 degrees. So the slope now is -1 plus R. That's the rate at which consumption today is traded with consumption tomorrow. How much do you get back in tomorrow's consumption by saving up something today? How much do you get in return for saving a little amount of consumption today? One salmon, lend it to 안창규 학생, I get back 1.2. So that's the rate at which consumption today and tomorrow is being traded, 1.2. That's your budget constraint. So someone at sort of this end will be you guys here. You're earning very little money at the moment, but you're expected to earn hopefully much better. You guys are bright students. You guys have a lot of potential. Despite this being 해조선 and difficult place to work in and get a work, I'm sure most of you are doing incredibly well. You can take pride in yourself. Too much of a TED Talk like lecture today. Anyway, but someone like here, who would that be? I'm earning a lot. People nearing their retirement. Yeah? So, you know, the professors that you see nearing retirement here today will be, well, actually, that's not a good example because of the pensions and everything, but people nearing their retirement will be in sort of this end. Yeah? So generally, a human being's cycle is sort of borrow, save, then using up your savings. That's what our lives look like. In the beginning, you got to buy a house, you got to raise a family, you borrow, then you start saving up for your retirement, then you use up on your saving towards the end. And whatever you have left over, you give it to the next generation. Now, then obviously, the case of a borrower and the case of a lender can be described like this. This is how much money you earn at the moment, but this is how much you consume. So what do you do? What are you doing? You're borrowing against your future income. So you have to pay back, reduce the consumption, and you got to pay back what you borrowed eventually. Lender is in the opposite situation. You've got too much money relative to where you want to consume. So you save up then consume more tomorrow. It all depends on your preferences. What your indifference curve looks like will determine where your optimal point of consumption is. That's the key. Where can you get the greatest amount of utility out of the budget constraint that you face? The budget constraint is you're going to be earning income today and tomorrow, or all of it tomorrow or all of it today. Doesn't matter. You've got some income coming in over 2 periods. But that gives you your budget constraint. You can borrow or lend at the specified market interest rate. Given that, where's the point of your optimal preference? What's the best consumption bundle that you can afford by borrowing and lending? That's what we as finance guys enable. That's what we do. Okay? So the indifference curve looks obviously convex. What does that capture? That captures the fact what I asked Chang Jung-woo at the beginning of the lecture. Would you rather be living high life today and Seoul-yok tomorrow, or would you prefer to live very gently, stably, going to abroad twice a year, going to fine dining places a couple of times, can engage in a bit of duty-free shopping from time to time, buying a watch, buying a jewelry, buying a Swarovski, whatever. That's generally what we prefer as human beings, as people. That's why the preference curve over consumption today and tomorrow is convex. Stability. You prefer stability. You prefer smoothing. So now here, suppose the interest rate increases. My question is, how does this affect the consumer? Well, obviously what you can say is, it depends on whether she is a lender or a borrower at the moment. And there's also going to be a substitution effect and income effect. That's why we did Slutsky equation before we are looking at this, okay? Now, the increase in interest rate pivots the budget constraint around the monetary income. It's like a price change, but not so. A usual price change of good one look like this, right? But interest rate change pivots the interest rate at your point of income endowment, M1, M2. Why is that? It's always affordable. You consuming your income must always be affordable. Interest rate change only affects the budget constraint of lenders and borrowers, but that point is actually aptly called Polonius point from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Shakespeare's Hamlet is one of the 4 great tragedies, obviously. Polonius is, before he dies, he leaves a last word to Hamlet, and he says, neither a borrower nor a lender be, for after that I sort of, my memory of the lines get hazy, but basically he warns Hamlet that if he becomes a lender, you see the ugly side of people that you love, and if you borrow, then you become that ugly person yourself. So consume what you have, consume what you earn. That's why that point is named Polonius point. Bit of a, for the borrower, what will an interest rate raise look like? Well, your initial budget constraint looked like this. Yep. But following an interest rate change, what does that happen? What happens here? Therefore, is the original consumption bundle still affordable or not? No. It makes sense. Suppose that you're borrowing to the maximum and interest rate increases. You've got to reduce your borrowing. Yeah? Now, so case 1, you either reduce your lending, reduce your borrowing. Or case 2, if the interest rate increase is so severe, what can you do? You can switch from being a borrower to being a lender. 2 options. Now, however, in the case of a lender, he must always remain a lender. You guys have already learned the concept of revealed preference. Can you tell me what's wrong if a lender becomes a borrower after an interest rate increase? 우리말로 할게요. 자, 돈을 빌려주던, save up 하던 사람이 이자율이 오르고 난 다음에 갑자기 돈을 빌리는 형태로 가버리면 뭐가 잘못됐습니까? 이 그림에서. 이거를 현시 선호 이론과 접해서 설명해 줄 수 있는 분, 박근호 학생. That's fine. I translate back.
이자율이 변하기 전에도
네.
저 소비점의 오른쪽 부분은 소비가 가능한 부분.
그렇죠.
이자율이 변하고 나서 그 부분을 소비한다는 건 말이야.
이해됩니까? So, the answer lies in revealed preference. Everywhere to the left of M2, to the right of M2, M1, could you consume it in the new budget constraint? Could you consume it before or not? Because it lies to the left of the original budget constraint, you could consume it. Yeah? But you chose to consume here. You could have done, but you didn't. What does that mean in terms of revealed preference? It is directly revealed, preferred to all other bundle here. Your C1, C2 is directly revealed, preferred to everywhere in that original budget constraint. So this blue line here lies within the original budget constraint. Is that possible? No. You can't consume there because otherwise you're not making a rational choice. You're not. You've got to be consuming somewhere to the left of here, which will be, in this case, in this graph, somewhere between here and here, where you can move out of your original indifference curve. You can attain higher utility, but you will always remain a lender. You can't say the same about the borrower, because at this point, when this shifts in, if you consume here, suppose, does that violate consumers' revealed preference? No. You're consuming here only because your original bundle is not affordable anymore. Now, remember what I said last week, and remember that carefully. You can only make judgments about revealed preference over the bundles that were always, you could have done, but you didn't. 할 수 있었는데 안 한 것에 대해서만 내가 현시 선호에 대해서 추론을 할 수 있다고 했습니다. When it's not affordable, I can't say anything about it. You can only make judgments about revealed preference over the goods that you could have consumed, but you chose not to. Is this point clear? Yep. So we can't say anything about the borrower or lender here. But we know one thing. if he remains a borrower, if he does, what can we conclude? He must be worse off. Why? Because, let's go back to case 1. What's happening here? The original budget constraint was this. Yep. But my new budget constraint is here. So if I choose to consume somewhere here, that means that bundle is worse off than my original bundle, because I could have chosen, in my original case, I could have chosen anywhere here, but I didn't. I didn't. Because my original bundle was better than anywhere else here. But if I choose to consume here, all I can say is, I'm worse off. I'm worse off. But there are conceivable circumstances under which you switch to a lender, becoming a lender, and improve your utility. So suppose this is your point of optimality. Yeah? But after an interest rate change, like, suppose you choose to consume somewhere like here. Yeah? You're better off. So, what I can say is, after a rate increase, a lender will always remain a lender. Yeah? And because the original bundle is always affordable, if you choose not to consume somewhere else, that must be because you're better off. Lender will remain a lender and he'll be better off. Borrower, on the other hand, can either remain a borrower or become a lender. If you remain a borrower, you're definitely worse off. If you switch to becoming a lender, after a huge interest rate hike, I can't say whether you're better off or worse off. It's summarized in those 3 lines. So actually, a better way of putting this is, a borrower can either be a lender or borrower, but we can only make judgment about whether he's better off or not if he remains a borrower. If he switches, no one knows. Lender remains a lender and he's better off after an interest rate increase. For an interest rate decrease, so if R goes down, we'll observe the opposite. The borrower will stay as a borrower and he will be better off. Now, can anyone show that to the class using a graph? Think of this as an exercise for revision. Is anyone willing to have a go? Suppose that the interest rate decreases, you're a borrower. Show 2 things. First, that you remain a borrower, and B, you're better off. These are the last few slides that I want to cover. Okay? And then I'll be done. The rest I can move to next Wednesday. So that's not a big major issue. The Slutsky equation we learned last week helps us to understand this. That's where I'm going to spend the last 10 minutes and be done. Okay? Now, the total effect of your consumption change, interest rate change is just like the price change of good 1. In other words, raising the interest rate is just like raising the price of consumption today relative to tomorrow. Why is that? You give up today's consumption, you get a lot more tomorrow. Yep? So that's a sum of substitution effect and the income effect, with income effect denoted by broken down into two parts, where you are consuming at the moment and the income effect. Now, where you're consuming, so X1 mattered last week, and it matters this week as well. Interest rate change means a lot for someone who is at the maximum of his borrowing. Yeah? So for someone who really doesn't have that much income and borrowed to the max of their maximum credit allowance, if an interest rate goes up, he's basically buggered. He's in big trouble. If you're borrowing, and that's why the household debt in Korea is such a damn big problem. If the interest rate goes up, people will have huge income effect because they've already borrowed a lot. But if your borrowing is manageable at small levels, interest rate change doesn't mean that much for you in terms of income effect. So, substitution effect tells us that we should cut C1, today's spending. What about the income effect? Now, is consumption today or consumption tomorrow, is any of them likely to be an inferior good? No, right? So they will both be normal goods. Yeah? So we can safely assume that C1M over M is positive. So let's write down like this. Interest rate change is like a price increase of P1. Yeah? So P1 goes up, interest rate goes up, then consumption goes down. That's positive. So, what can we conclude? Everything depends on the sign of this, whether you are a lender or whether you are a borrower. 예요, 예. 모든 걸 좌우하는 건 예의 사인입니다. 예 사인. So, if that is negative, then these two effects reinforce each other, so you cut consumption. When is that? If you're a borrower, you cut today's consumption, for sure, other way around. If the interest rate goes down, that is always plus and that is always plus. So now, lender for sure will increase his first period consumption. Borrower, we don't know. So that's why I told you about this Slutsky equation last time. Now, the reason why I'm deliberately going quickly over this is because I don't want this intertemporal choice to be so fixated on the Slutsky equation of things. Yeah? So that's me saying, in other words, I'm not going to examine you to decompose the Slutsky relationship for interest rate changes. Okay? That's the reason why I'm telling you this, but I'm not expecting you to reproduce that in the exam. What you do have to do, however, is what we have done earlier in terms of revealed preference. Okay? That's what I think is much more important. So Slutsky equation-wise, just for those of you who have a keen mind and understand what's going on, just know that something like that happens. Okay? So for those of you who are just wishing to pass the exam, you can skip this in other words. Okay? So Slutsky equation is a very useful tool. Now you can use this to talk about other stuff like inflation and stuff like that, but that stuff, this end of the stuff is much easier to cover. And I think that leads us to another discussion on real interest rate and more on present values. And the material we're going to see on next Wednesday, by the way, is very close to what we know already if you've took even the most basic course in financial management.